This case study is all about the DC snipers. This happened in 2002, which is really not that long ago, and it happened pretty much in our neighborhood. So this is interesting. It's very close to home. I hope you find it as interesting as I do. The focus for this case study is all about ballistics. So let's get started talking about the crime. The DC sniper attacks, aka the Beltway sniper attacks, were a series of coordinated shootings that occurred during 3 weeks in October 2002 in the states of Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia. A total of 10 people were killed, and 3 others were critically injured in the metropolitan area along Interstate 95 in Northern Virginia. The snipers were John Allen Muhammad, 41, and Lee Boyd Malvo, 17, who traveled in a blue 1990 Chevrolet Caprice. Their crime spree featured murders and robberies in the states of Alabama, Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, Washington, and Virginia. In 10 months, the soon-to-be-known DC snipers killed 17 people and injured 10 others. Their final sniper attacks began on October 2nd when a bullet shattered the window of a craft store in Aspen Hill, Maryland, narrowly missing a cashier. Less than an hour after that incident, a 55-year-old man was shot and killed while walking across a parking lot in Wheaton, Maryland. Although the shootings were not initially recognized as being connected, law enforcement authorities soon realized that the acts were just the first of what would be more than a dozen linked shootings over the next 23 days. By the end of the day, on October 3rd, 5 more victims had been shot and killed in the DC metropolitan area. Investigators determined that bullets from the first 7 shootings were fired from the same weapon, a high-powered rifle. On the morning of the 5th day of the shootings, a 13-year-old boy was shot and injured in front of his middle school. Afterwards, investigators found a tarot card with a note to law enforcement written on it. "For you, Mr. Police. Code. Call me God. Do not release to the press." Over the next 3 weeks, more than 30 different law enforcement agencies at the local, state, and federal levels would ultimately work together to track, identify, and capture the parties responsible for the attacks. Important phone calls. Between October 15th and October 21st, 4 telephone calls were received by the police, and one by a Catholic priest that threw significant light on the case. The first message stated, "Good morning. Don't say anything, but the killers are in your area. Look at the tarot card. We have called you 2 times before trying to negotiate. We've got no response. People are dying." The caller then hung up. The callers claiming to be the snipers were asking for a ransom of $5 million. Through phone conversations, the shooters told investigators to contact a police officer in Montgomery, Alabama, to verify a murder they had committed outside of a liquor store. Authorities confirmed that on September 21st, 2002, there had been a robbery of a liquor store in the course of which 2 women had been shot. A young black male had been seen running from the scene. There was a police chase, but the suspect got away. The officer who participated in that chase stated that the fugitive dropped a magazine, which was a gun catalog called Armor Light. The fingerprints found on the magazine were matched to a young Jamaican immigrant, Lee Boyd Malvo. During the same time frame, investigators received a phone call from Tacoma, Washington. The caller told authorities that he believed the sniper was a friend of his, John Muhammad. The caller also stated that Muhammad was regularly in the company of a young teenager. A photograph was forwarded to the tipster, who confirmed that the teenager was the acquaintance of John Muhammad. On October 23rd, a check with the National Crime Information Center computer files showed that Muhammad owned a 1990 Chevrolet Caprice with a New Jersey license tag NDA 21Z. A description of that automobile was broadcast by the press later that same day. The capture. Once the description of the Chevrolet Caprice with the New Jersey license tags went out over the airwaves, Whitney Donahue, a refrigerator repairman who was driving home, exited Interstate 70 to stop at a rest area. As he stopped, he spotted in the parking lot a car matching the description that had been broadcast over the radio. He immediately called 911 and the police arrived within 10 minutes. Because the darkly tinted windows made it impossible to determine whether the occupants of the car were asleep, Teams of agents and police, wearing protective gear, charged the car and smashed out the side windows of the Caprice. Inside, they found Mohammed and Malvo, who were then taken into custody. The owner of the Shershaw Auto Sales Company testified that Mohammed purchased the Caprice, then later made an in-court identification of Mohammed as the man who bought the vehicle. Ultimately, 16 separate witnesses identified the car as the vehicle they had seen at or near one of the shooting scenes at approximately the time of a shooting. When the police team broke into the car on the early morning of October 24th, Mohammed was found sleeping on the back bench seat, which was partially rotated out from its normal position. Behind the other section of the rear seat, attached by a bungee cord for quick removal, was a rifle, with a live round in the chamber and live rounds in the magazine. A tripod was mounted on the muzzle end of the barrel. A right-handed brown glove was stuffed in the hole that had been cut in the trunk lid. It was later found to match a left-handed glove that had been found at the site of one of the killings. The motive and the plan. Lee Boyd Malvo, a native of Jamaica, was 14 years old in 1999 when he first met John Muhammad. Muhammad had kidnapped his 3 children and moved to the island of Antigua, where Malvo was living. The two became close friends, but Muhammad was forced to return to the United States when his immigration documents were discovered to be illegal. A few months after Muhammad's return, Malvo illegally entered the U.S. and moved in with Muhammad. By 2001, Muhammad's ex-wife had moved to Washington State with Muhammad following. In January of 2002, Malvo reunited with Muhammad, and according to Malvo, the two began training for their terrorist acts. According to Malvo, quote, "I absorbed everything Muhammad taught me, especially weapons," end quote. The two spent time at a local rifle range where they began to focus exclusively on high-power rifles. In July of 2002, Muhammad learned that his wife and their children were living in Clinton, Maryland, and he announced to Malvo that they were going to D.C. to terrorize these people. According to Malvo, Muhammad was bitter that a court order had given custody of his children to his wife. It was shortly before their departure that the rifle used in the sniper attacks was reported stolen from a local gun shop in Tacoma, Washington. Malvo described how the two then traveled to the East Coast in August 2002, where they first conducted a surveillance of the home of Muhammad's wife and children. They then traveled to Trenton, New Jersey, where Muhammad purchased the Caprice automobile used in the attacks. Muhammad had gotten the ideas for modifying the rear of the vehicle in order to turn it into an effective gun port for a sniper from a terrorist manual. The two then traveled to Montgomery, Alabama, in order to test the success of their modifications to the Caprice. It was at the scene of the September 21st, 2002 shootings in Montgomery that Malvo, while fleeing the scene, dropped the aforementioned manual that contained his fingerprints. The two then traveled to Maryland to scout effective spots for the shootings, measuring distances, looking for areas that were populated, that were without surveillance cameras, and hiding places where shots could be fired without witnesses. Malvo testified to the several-stage strategy that Muhammad had devised. The first stage of the plan was to create general chaos by committing 6 slayings a day for 30 days. The second stage of the grand strategy, which they were preparing to put into operation at the time of their apprehension, was to create more damage by using explosives with ball bearings or nails aimed at schools, school buses, and hospitals, especially children's hospitals. The plan also included the use of explosives to kill police officers. The initial target for the second stage was to have been the city of Baltimore. Malvo elaborated with respect to the plan to kill police officers. The rest of this is a quote with some questions thrown in. So, beginning of the quote, Baltimore was going to be the main center of Phase 2. Essentially what was going to happen is you would kill one police officer with a different weapon, and it wouldn't be linked to the shootings. Then dozens of officers would go to the funeral, and then you would have improvised explosions. Some clarifying questions during this interview follow. So the question, you would have what? Malvo answers, improvised explosives. Question, improvised explosives? Yes. And what does that mean? It would be a mixture of C4 and some other stuff with ball bearings and nails. The first would blow up. It would blow up and the projectiles would kill everyone at the scene. Then there would be secondary devices, which would be for when ambulances came. The evidence. The ballistics examination ultimately revealed that the rifle found in the sniper's car had fired the rounds involved in 9 of the murders in Virginia, and also the murder at the liquor store in Montgomery, Alabama. Other incriminating evidence that was recovered in the search of the Caprice included a wallet containing an AT&T calling card, which had been used near various crime scenes, 2 identification cards from different states with different names, but both bearing the photograph of Muhammad, 2 walkie-talkies, maps of the shooting area, a GPS device, and a note recording the task force tip line number and other phone numbers connected to the killings. A digital evidence expert from the FBI laboratory was able to retrieve data that had been deleted from a seized laptop computer. That retrieved data included such phrases as the truth of the Muhammad assassinations, people to die later, Officer Derrick is dead, and priest called at 8. On the hard drive were the words, to whom it may concern, call me God. Also found was Streets and Trips software, which had been installed on September 29, 2002. On it were skulls and crossbones and pushpins at various locations linked to specific sniper shootings. The 2 were subsequently convicted of the multiple murders. John Allen Muhammad was executed by lethal injection on November 10, 2009. Lee Boyd Malvo is serving a term of life in prison without the possibility of parole in the state of Virginia.